Electronisounds Audio, the YouTube channel for you.
Hey, what's happening, friends? It's Dean from Electronisounds. Stick around. Today we're going to be checking out a brand new iPad synth from Audiokit. This one is called Nerd Synth, and not only is it a really versatile synthesizer, but I also made 50 of the included factory presets for this one. Come on, let's take a listen to what it sounds like. Let's take an overview of the Nerd Synth at this time. First of all, we've got some tabs that we can easily tab through the different pages of Nerd Synth. But more importantly, if we click that same tab button at the top more than once, we can actually kind of scroll through multiple pages and choose what we want the interface layout to be like, which is kind of convenient. Now, on this first main page here, we're going to start with the volume knob, and we've got a limiter, which will limit the output of the synthesizer. Next, we've got a drive setting, so we can crank up some distortion and some heat if we want to. Next to that, we've got an oscilloscope here so we can see the actual waveform of the sound that we're playing, and a little description for most of the presets as well. We've got a filter here with cutoff and resonance, and we've also got our own modulation envelope setting down here for the filter as well. Now this filter can be a low pass filter, a band pass filter, or a high pass filter, so it's a multiple state filter. We've also got some auto pan settings to get the sound to move a little bit on its own in the stereo field. How much it moves is going to be dependent on how much you turn the depth of the auto pan up. Next up, we've got a noise setting, which is like adding a little bit of crispy white noise to your sound. I find that can be really useful for like dub chord effects, or for, helping a lead synthesizer sound just kind of cut through the mix a little bit more. Next up, we've got some delay settings where we can crank up the feedback if we want to using that taps amount. We can set the time of the delay, and this can be synced to your host tempo as well as how much of that delay we want in the mix. Next up, we've got a reverb. We can adjust the size of the reverb, how much we want to low cut or take off some of those super low frequencies so that the reverb doesn't get super muddy. And then we can also adjust how much of the reverb is going to be in the mix. Next up, we've got our oscillator section. We've got 2 oscillators in NerdSynth, and we can mix between them as we see fit. We can also automate this mix knob. In fact, you can put an LFO, or automation basically, on just about any knob that we're looking at on any of these sections of NerdSynth. It's one of the things that I really like about this synthesizer. But for each oscillator, we can adjust the level, the tuning, the fine tuning, the pan, and in case of the pulse width modulation, we can also affect that as well. Now we can choose between some basic waveforms here: a sine, a triangle, a saw, a square, and also that pulse width square. But if we want to, we can click this button here, which gets us into a whole another section of waveforms to choose from. Things like extended square, extended pulse, extended sine, extended dual bola. We need that dual bola, friends. All right, we've got waveforms like a metal marimba, clav, some formant waveforms here, some organ waveforms, and down at the bottom, even some sync waveforms. So lots of different potential for shaping your own sounds inside of NerdSynth. These aren't like multi-samples. This isn't a rompler. These are all actual waveforms, and this is actual synthesis that we're dealing with inside of NerdSynth. Lots of possibilities for sound design. I had a really nice time exploring this one and creating the presets that I did for the factory bank here. Here we've got our amplitude envelope, so we can adjust the attack, decay, sustain, and release of the sound. And we've also got an individual envelope for adjusting the filter settings as well. Next up on the oscillator page here, we can access the LFOs, we've got 3 separate LFOs inside of NerdSynth, which is great, but we can also assign each LFO to 2 different destinations. And like I said just a minute ago, that's pretty much every single knob inside of the synthesizer. We've got so many destinations for modulating here. Really, if you're into creative sound design, this is definitely one to check out. These LFOs can be like a saw ramp up, a saw ramp down, a triangle, which is like kind of like a really smooth one that I really like. It's sort of like a sine as well. We've got your basic square, and we've also got your random type of sample and hold LFOs. Again, each LFO can be assigned to 2 separate destinations. These can be free running LFOs, or they can be synced to tempo here, or they can be set to like restart. So every time you hit a note, it's going to restart that LFO. They can be a one-shot, meaning when you hit a note, it's only going to play the LFO like one time through, and then the sound will play as normal. After that, we have an arpeggio setting where we can, turn on that arp, and we can set this to any rate we want, like 16th notes or 32nd notes, or even up to 64th notes. We can change this interval here, so we can have a full octave range if we want, 2 octave range, 3 octave range. We've also got some different, settings down here for the arpeggio. We can set the gate time, meaning it's going to play longer notes or shorter notes. If we shorten that gate time, really handy for programming your own ARP settings here. We've got some different styles for the ARP, like basic up and down twice, and random styles for the arpeggiator. We can even choose if we want the arpeggiator to go to just oscillator 1, just oscillator 2, or both of the oscillators. Down here at the very bottom, we've got some basic settings. We can even extend the keyboard if we want and have it a large keyboard or a small keyboard. We can turn the hold on, and then it will just hold down whatever note or chord you've played. Over here, we're back over to the LFO settings on the top, but we've got some interesting additions here in the middle, which will really help you in the sound design department. For one, we've got this really great lo-fi settings, so you can get those 12-bit kind of old school style sounds with just a little bit of, grit and dirt. You can use this crush knob here to get a little bit, or maybe a lot more, crushed up and dirty, gritty sounds. You can get those 8-bit sounds. You can even go down to 6-bit, and you got it, 4-bit sounds here, 2-bit sounds here, for really absolutely grungy, distorted madness that we can get into. This is one of my favorite sections of the whole synth right here, is we can turn on a unison setting. If we don't want it to just be one voice, we can actually have multiple voices. We can have 2 voices, 3 voices, up to 4 different voices, and you can detune those from each other and spread that out into kind of like a super saw sound. For those of you who might be familiar with those old school Roland super saw trance sounds, the stereo setting is going to divide those 4 voices but between the stereo range here, so you can get really wide detuned sounds if you want to, or you can keep that really small and keep those settings really tame. We can even use some different forms of unison, like the 4 hyper voices or the 4 beast voices, all just a little bit different sounding way to utilize the unison. I can't stress this enough. If you want those big wide lush sounds for like pads or like super saws, definitely check out that unison. Now, the sounds can be polyphonic, or if we click the mono button here, they can be monophonic, meaning no matter how many notes we hit, it's only going to play one note at a time. We can set this portamento or glide, high or low, so that it's going to either bend between those notes, or if we keep the glide or portamento all the way down, it's going to be real staccato and just really clean between the notes with no glide. I do like a little bit of glide between those notes, even on those low sub bass lines. Over here, we've got the Super FM section, which is really nice for getting a little bit of a plucky kind of percussive sound on the attack of some of your sounds. And again, like the arpeggio, we can set that destination to just oscillator 1, just oscillator 2, or both. And we can set the depth of the Super FM and also how much FM modulation we're actually getting. Next up, we've got a ring mod crush section, which can get some really outrageous mayhem going in your sounds. You can really crush that up. You can really, crank up the mix, and this droid knob is going to make it kind of more or less metallic, or just kind of maybe a variation on the ring mod. Definitely something to play with here. Next up, we have a tremolo section, which sounds really great and kind of gives a wavering kind of sound. Like you can get a really nice sort of like lushness to your sounds using that tremolo, and a lot of that, movement in your sound can be added. You can even automate with an LFO the depth or the rate of the tremolo for some really creative sound design. We've got a chorus section, which is really nice for kind of thickening up and widening up your sounds. I like to add just a little bit of chorus to a lot of the sounds that I programmed inside of the Nerd Synth here. Next up, we've got an effects page, which is bringing up the step sequencer, which we can have instead of the arpeggio if we want. We can program mono synth lines and get, whatever notes we want it to play. We can get those happening here. We can turn those, on and off if you want a rest for some of those, if you don't want all 16 notes to play. Super handy for creating neat, patterns and psytrance type arpeggios per se. We can turn that on and off, and we can adjust the rate of this, how fast it's playing, up up to 64th notes again for getting almost those old school chiptune type of, arpeggio sounds. And we've got a gate here as well, meaning we can adjust how long the sound is playing, whether it's a really short, tight sound or whether it's a longer sound. We can adjust the amount of steps that we're playing. So if we want to get like maybe just a really basic acid arp or something like that, we could just have a 4-step, pattern, or a 3-step rather. And here, just like the arpeggio setting and the FM setting, we can choose whether this sequencer rather goes to oscillator 1, oscillator 2, or both oscillators. Here we can lock the sequence so that you can scroll through different presets and the sequence will stay the same. So you can just, like, if you program in a sequence that you really like, but maybe you want to hear what that sequence sounds like on some other sound presets, you just lock that sequence and then you can scroll through some other sounds. Over here on the Pro side of things, we've got the third arpeggiator, the third LFO, not the third arpeggiator. There's only one arpeggiator in NerdSynth, but the third LFO, which we can, again, like I said before, assign to 2 separate destinations. So 3 LFOs and 6 destinations possible for those LFOs. This can also be a free-running LFO, or we can have it in the restart mode, or the one-shot mode, or the ARP shot mode, just like the other LFOs. We've also got a flanger effect that we can turn on and a vibrato effect that we can turn on. Now, if you use the vibrato in conjunction with the tremolo, you can get some really nice kind of, I'm doing jazz hands, we can get some really nice kind of like, wavering kind of movement in your sounds, from just a gentle little, twinkling of some movement to really extreme, super jazz hands type movement. Here, if we want to, we can even split oscillators on the keyboard. So if you want to maybe program something to where oscillator 1 is a low bass and oscillator 2 is like a higher sound, you can even do that if you want to. All right. I think that about covers it. Let's take a listen to some more of what this sounds like.